Guys, you probably already heard about the interception of the major Russian Air Force plane IL-76, and today in this video I'll give you everything I was able to find at the moment of recording this video, and also the Chief of Staff of Ukraine finally released a statement, so we will all together be able to make our own decision who was behind this attack. Besides that, Russians sent a gift to Ukraine, and then there is also an alleged plan of Russians if they decide to attack NATO and how NATO will respond. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russia Dude, and today let's go straight to the point and talk about this destruction of a Russian Air Force plane Il-76, which according to many different sources was either transporting Ukrainian prisoners of war or metallic cylinders S-300s. So, what actually happened? What's real information and what's not? Let's start together to figure things out. So, obviously, immediately after the incident, according to the Russian propaganda, it was Ukrainians who attacked this plane without probably knowing that there were Ukrainian prisoners of war in the number of 63 of them, and unfortunately all of them were eliminated. And guys, before we go even further, please allow me a very quick disclaimer, because if you remember at the moment of elimination of Prigozhin, which was also an aircraft situation, my video was completely demonetized and taken down by YouTube for showing this kind of footage. For this reason, unfortunately, I will have to censor everything related to this incident in today's episode, but as always, if you want to see fully uncensored version, it will be available on my Patreon. The link is down below, and there is 1 week of free access for every single one of you to try. And so yes, back to the incident. Whenever the very first people arrived to the place, they saw the remains of the plane with small little holes, which were pretty much very typical for this plane to be intercepted by most likely an air defense missile. And then even the locals living in that area, they were able to find pretty much the specific place of this once again incident, which was pretty much showing that the plane was flying towards the north or the northwest, not to the territory of Ukraine. And because of this, a lot of speculation started to appear on the internet. First of all, let's see the Ukrainian side. They were mentioning that they intercepted a Russian plane which was transporting a lot of S-300 metallic cylinders. But according to the Russian side, and one of the first version came to us from a liar, Andrei Kartapolov, who pretty much could never be trusted. He said that it was Ukrainians who used 3 metallic cylinders to intercept this plane. Most likely they were launched either from IRIS-T or Patriot systems, and so these were Ukrainians who intercepted the plane with Ukrainian prisoners of war, at least 63 of them who were on board. And then another major propagandist, Margarita Simalyan, she released this alleged picture of the list of those Ukrainians on board of the plane, which later was completely refuted and marked as a fake news by both Ukrainians and Russians, because some of these names, if not even the majority of these names, already appeared previously on older lists of the exchange, prisoners of war exchange lists, and majority of them were, or at least some of them were exchanged back in 2022. And even though at first the Ukrainian media was saying that yes, it was them indeed who were able to take down this plane, later they started to correct their information in the news headlines. They just started to say that the plane is down. As simple as that. They did not say who was responsible, but later on, after all the evidence started to pour in together, the General Staff of Ukraine did release a statement. And they mentioned that Ukrainians will continue to eliminate all the possible threat, including the ones in the aerospace threat in the border between Belgorod and Kharkov, which pretty much indirectly confirmed that yes, it was them, most likely, who intercepted this plane for better or worse. But the Ukrainian media continues to push the narrative that there were no prisoners of war on the board of this plane, and that this plane was transporting metallic cylinders. This information, at least once again, is presented to me at the moment of recording this video, so whenever you're watching this, things might be different. And I'm recording, as of right now, with the information I have. And another interesting thing is that on January 24th, a pretty big exchange of prisoners of war was supposed to happen between Russia and Ukraine, and as soon as this plane incident happened, Russians pulled out of this deal, which, to be honest, is very suspicious, and soon you will know why. And pretty much, as you could have guessed, the reason for this it is because the plane incident happened, and Russian pretty much kinda said, which can be summarized, that we do not feel safe about the exchange at this very moment because of what happened, so we're not gonna do it. In response to that, Ukrainians said that yes, the exchange was supposed to happen, but Ukrainians were the only ones who fulfilled the obligations, that they were able to transport people in safely manner with the previously agreed routes in the previously agreed vehicles. And in return to that, Russians were keeping them in the dark. They did not say where they're going, which method of transportation will be used. And then suddenly a very dangerous, almost military-related plane is being lifted very close to the border with Kharkov. So Ukrainians had to act on whatever information they had at the moment of that incident. And so, as you can see, the information as of right now is pretty confusing. It is possible that Ukrainians were behind it. It might be also Russians who did the interception in order to blame Ukrainians. Maybe this plane was carrying prisoners of war, or maybe it was carrying metallic cylinders. So, long story short, I would not like personally to make any assumptions, at least until I have full picture in front of me. Instead, I just decided to present these facts for you guys, for you to make your very own educated decision. Also, if you want, also on my Patreon there is additional photos and videos of this incident. If you want, go ahead and do a research on your own, and then let us all know in the comments who do you think is behind this attack. But for those of you who are still curious what do I think, here is my very own personal and just basic assumption, wild assumption. Maybe, yes, it was Ukraine behind it, but they did it not on purpose, because Russians kinda leaked the information that there will be a plane transporting these missiles, so Ukrainians were thinking that they were intercepting an actual military plane with the metallic cylinders, but in fact Russians misleaded them, putting prisoners of war on the board so that they can blame Ukraine for destroying their own people. Once again, please do not rely on this version as the main one, because this is my only personal vision, and also you can let us know in the comments if it kinda makes sense or not. And so yes, and now let me give you a very quick update from the south, and then from the east of Ukraine we're also going to talk about a quote-unquote gift from Russians to Ukrainians, and then we'll finalize everything with the involvement of NATO and potential plan of Russians to attack the alliance. But first of all, before we begin, if you guys appreciate this style of daily news updating, if you want to show support for my work, all you can do is to simply like this video and subscribe to my channel. We're very close to 240,000. Thank you so much. Now let's continue. And so yes, first of all, we make a quick stop in Odessa, where local residents reported some very loud noises coming from one of residential buildings, which apparently turned out to be a drone. Next we go to the northern border between Russia and Ukraine, and right here, according to Serhiy Naev, as you can see from this video, Ukrainians created a counter-sabotage group in order to stop Russians, to prevent Russians from crossing the border. Next we go to Kharkov, where unfortunately this last night another residential building has been damaged as a result of a Russian attack. And then, as we go along the eastern front lines, Russians were able to reportedly make some small gains, but they are not as big because of their own minefields, which are so thick, which are so many mines close to each other, so it is even hard for Russians to advance. And such as, for example, right here is the video along the eastern front lines where one of Russian tanks is trying to cross these fields, which is also equipped with a lot of mines on board, which is then being targeted by a Ukrainian drone, creating an extremely big ball of fire. Next is the video coming to us close to Yempolivka, where Ukrainians were able to do a counter-offensive and pretty much fully dismantle Russian tanks. Then we get closer to Bakhmut frontline, where in the last 24 hours at least 7 attempts by Russians in order to attack position of Ukrainians were made. All of them were intercepted, and they happened along Ivanivka, Klishivka and Avdiivka front lines. And then right here is a pretty strange video of Russian soldiers talking about the use of a Ship 213mm RBU 6000 rocket launcher, which once again is intended to be used on the board of the vessel, but they are using it almost by hand. And right here, for example, is the video which shows the consequences. Our next stop already brings us closer to Marinka frontline, where at least 5 Russian military armored vehicles were destroyed next to Novomikhailivka. But unfortunately, obviously there are losses in military equipment among Ukrainians as well, such as, for example, right here is damaged Bradley infantry fighting vehicle in Avdiivka. As we go a little bit more to the south, to this small settlement called Pilne, an artillery firing position of Russians has been destroyed by Ukrainians. And ultimately speaking about the so-called gifts of Russians to Ukrainians, right here is a pretty interesting video from Chernihiv region, where you can see a temporarily pontoon bridge which Russians used previously to cross some parts of river, simply floating closer to the positions of Ukrainians. Somehow Russians were able to lose this entire massive construction, not able to retrieve it, and then it just peacefully came into the hands of Ukrainians, which most likely will use it to their own advantage. So yes, as you can see, unfortunately for the last couple of days, the situation in this war began to escalate, to say the least. For this reason, it is no wonder that some military experts from the West, such as for example US General retired one Ben Hodges, he proposed a plan what if and how Russia might attack NATO. According to him, the very first step is that Russia will use cyber attacks to disable the infrastructure of the European countries, and then they might launch several missile attacks against residential and civilian objects such as radars, radio towers, airports, airfields and so on, also obviously including oil reservoirs, and then they call it attacks against legitimate military targets. After this, potentially a ground operation might start with the purpose of capturing Suwalki corridor, which potentially can open Russia a way to invade even Poland. And at the same time, the Russian Navy in the Arctic Sea will try to establish the dominance, and after all this, which potentially might happen in the span of only a couple of days, Russia will decide to take a temporary pause to try and to evaluate the response of NATO and how to act in the future. And once again, in my very personal idea, at least in the near future, the probability of this happening is extremely low, but NATO does not want to take a chance of this happening and not being able to respond. That is why right now they're starting the biggest military exercise in the 40 years. The very big one before that happened in 1988, and this time it will involve reportedly 90,000 soldiers. The name of this military training exercise is Steadfast Defender 24, and it started with the departure from Norfolk, Virginia, one of the landing ships of USS Gunston Hall, as you can see from this picture, and this one will be sailing across Atlantic closer to Europe. And the purpose of this military exercise is to see how NATO can respond from the potential threat from the east, from the attacks from such countries as Russia. And well, Russia itself, specifically its Baltic fleet, decided to do its own coastal missile exercises in response to this NATO training, which unfortunately once again confirmed the fact that right now tensions are high. It feels like that something that might happen, which might sound insignificant at first, might lead to a wider, much bigger response from either of the sides. Hopefully this does not happen, hopefully the war itself will be over as soon as possible, but we should be prepared for anything possible to happen. I will keep making these videos for as long as needed, so guys, if you don't want to miss them, please consider subscribing to my channel. Also, if I hear something about this plane incident, I will also make a video about this, so if you don't want to miss it, another reason for you guys to subscribe. So thank you so much, patrons, for your support, and see you tomorrow.